Now, we're very happy to say that Philippe Auclair is with us. Philippe, hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Interesting times at PSG. So Mauricio Pochettino and his staff appointed on Saturday up until 2022 with the option of a third year. He obviously played for the club previously back in 01-03. Before Pochettino and all that, can we have a glance back at the Thomas Tuchel era? As things stand, PSG are third in Ligue 1 after 17 games, which is kind of interesting. But they are only a point behind Lyon and Lille, who are joint top. They're through to the Champions League knockout stages, as Manchester United fans will know well. Last year, Champions League final, and their seventh Ligue 1 in 8 years. So does Tuchel depart with his reputation enhanced or diminished? Is he hot property now in European football?
I'll say neither. And the reason is that the results have been, what you would expect. He was the first PSG manager to take the club to a Champions League final, which is a great achievement, even if it was an achievement that was reached in pretty peculiar circumstances. We'll remember the game against Atalanta, for example, and the kind of lucky draw that PSG had in the final late, but they made the most of it. So in this context, he did very well. In other contexts, he was not exactly as successful as I think he himself and the hierarchy at PSG would have liked him to be. They haven't quite gone past this glass ceiling that they seem to bump their head against ever since, actually, Carlo Ancelotti was the manager of the club. And despite huge investment, they succeeded domestically, but to be honest, this is par for the course. This is just like for them to win the title and even to do a treble is nothing exceptional. It's almost like avoiding relegation for a mid-table club in the Premier League. So his legacy, if there is such a word, is very difficult to evaluate at this moment because you don't feel that there is a legacy as such, that you don't feel that what he has done as PSG is going to have a lasting impact on what the club is going to do over the next couple of seasons. And actually, the very illustration of that is the fact they've taken on a manager who is a legacy manager, i.e. Mauricio Pochettino, a man who's never won anything, but a man who is capable not only to give them success in the short term, which is what they want, but also to build the foundations of the PSG that Nasser El-Khelaifi and his bosses dream of.
Thomas Tuchel's position never felt that secure. I mean, even take something he said in October. He was very unhappy that PSG lost Cavani to Manchester United and Thiago went to Chelsea as well. And he was saying, we lose too many players on free transfers. Yep. And Leonardo, sporting director, came out and said, Tuchel needs to understand how delicate the current situation is. We've seen a drop of more than 100 million euros in our income. We've got financial fair play. The club and I really aren't pleased about his comments about the lack of signings. If someone isn't happy, they should leave. I'll speak to him in private about this. Now, I'm no fortune teller, Philippe, but at that stage, if I was Pochettino, my ears were peaking. The only way Tuchel could have survived was to make himself virtually unsackable at all times. And PSG's domestic form was very, very average. 14 points from a possible 24. What's this about?
It's about mostly an impossible season to manage to start with. It's the result of, obviously their season ended much, much later than anybody else in the French league. He's had to rely on a squad which was never complete, never full. You had all the COVID cases with very strange behavior from some top players like Neymar, for example. You might remember that. There were a number of injuries. He's never been able to put together the team that he really wanted. And to be honest, I don't think he had the team he wanted either. And when Leonardo is alluding to the differences of appreciation between himself and his then manager, a lot of it relates to the politics of recruitment. Tuchel really felt that the club was not recruiting properly. I have to say that the financial fair play angle is a complete red herring, because we all know that UEFA has actually more or less suspended de facto FPF because of the pandemic. So, and PSG has got a few millions in the bank to deal with. But it was really one of the many things on which the two men were at loggerheads. And it held on until the final of the Champions League. According to everything I've heard from actually inside the camp, the atmosphere within PSG, the dressing room was really good up until that final against Bayern Munich. They had found a kind of togetherness that perhaps had been elusive beforehand in the run-up to the final, but then afterwards everything went wrong. And the results on the pitch were very disappointing. They were not exactly unexpected. And to be honest, many people thought this was just a period of adaptation for this PSG, who's played far longer than the others, hasn't had the full squad, and also these internal struggles that had to be resolved one way or another. So is Tuchel responsible for that? Certainly not entirely.
Because he said even just last month that he felt more like a sports politician or sports minister than a football coach. I mean, like this thing was just brewing. His sacking was brewing clearly when he was saying these kind of things. I saw as well Thomas Meunier, who left in the summer. He says he remembers his 4 years at PSG as nothing but birthday parties, which is just one of the great quotes, I think. And I see is it CNN Brazil are saying Neymar has been having some kind of festive bash underground, which he's denying. So, you know, these are all the things that Pochettino now is suddenly going to face.
Yes, it's going to be interesting. There have been quite a few reports about this massive bash. Some people said 500 people were invited, not in Neymar's house, but in another place close to his home in Brazil. He's not come back in a fit state because, for example, he won't be in the squad which is going to play against Saint-Etienne this evening, in the resumption of the French league. There are a number of problems that Pochettino will have to face very, very quickly. There is indiscipline within this camp, and it has been the case for a very long time. A recurring problem that all managers since Antoine Kombouaré and Carlo Ancelotti, Laurent Blanc, Unai Emery had to face was the fact that they never quite felt that the PSG hierarchy, i.e. Nasser El-Khelaifi, was fully on their side when they were having problems, especially disciplinary problems with some players. And it's well known as well that PSG is a little bit like the old FC Hollywood that Bayern Munich used to be at one point. Some players don't necessarily have the kind of hygiene in terms of a lifestyle, of course, that you would expect from top footballers. And it's been very difficult for managers so far to be able to impose their will and their discipline on that group of players. They have tried to address that by moving some players away. They have tried to address that by having managers who had a reputation for being quite strict disciplinarians, which is certainly true of Tuchel and is even true of Mauricio Pochettino. So you would say that, yes, the next few weeks are going to be very interesting in terms of team selection and in terms of what happens exactly in the relationship between the player and the new manager. And believe me, PSG being the leakiest club in Liga, we will know about this fairly soon.
Yeah, it just seems like such a mess to try and clean up. Yeah. And it's not that the dice are rigged necessarily, but it's complicated by the fact that you, seemingly any manager who goes in there, you in Pochettino's case, you are not as powerful as Neymar. For instance, one of the main protagonists when it comes to a lack of hygiene. I like that phrase of yours, by the way. So Neymar's off doing his thing, and the president enjoys chatting to Neymar, and it's nice. There's egos, and it's nice, and me and Neymar are on our level, and we're good friends, and Neymar's doing his thing. Yep. And meanwhile, you're Pochettino coming into this mess where previously, the alpha males in your dressing room were Harry Kane and Son, both absolute models of professionalism and humility. So how does any manager clean up PSG when effectively that manager is not all that powerful?
I guess you've just given one of the reasons why Pochettino's contract is only 18 months long. Why would a club which has just netted one of the most sought-after managers in the world game would only give him 18 months? No way. That's not going to happen. So my guess would be that Mauricio Pochettino would like to taste the water for a while before fully engaging with PSG, because he might have some ideas at the back of his mind. What can I say? I think you're absolutely right. I think the coziness of the relationships that El-Khelaifi and some other people at the club have had with some of the star players has been really a problem. It's also, I don't think it's not betraying a secret when saying that when things don't go right, it becomes quite difficult for the managers to have a direct link to their owner and to their chairman, i.e. Nasser El-Khelaifi, and beyond that, the Emir of Qatar. And there tends to be well, the players rule basically, and this is where, you know, when the appointment of Mauricio Pochettino, you could see it in two ways. You could see it, first of all, it's a really quite fashionable and impressive appointment, but it might also be a statement of intent, because we all know how Mauricio Pochettino worked at Espanyol, at Southampton, and at Tottenham, and we know that he's somebody who has very high demands in terms of discipline and the way the players behave on and off the pitch. So maybe they brought him for precisely for that reason, because they understand that some of their star players do need. I mean, and Neymar is not the only one. Would you think of somebody like Verratti, for example, who is clearly one of the great talents of his generation in midfield, has never been able to fulfill this potential precisely because of a lifestyle that is perhaps not exactly ideal for a top footballer, and a number of injuries, which perhaps were also caused by the fact that he doesn't look after himself as he should. So you bring in Mauricio Pochettino and you hope he's going to bring in the same kind of discipline he brought in his previous clubs. But that goes obviously with a risk, which is the antagonization of some key players within that PSG team, players who've been there for a while, players who've seen managers come and go, and whom at the end of Tuchel's reign really couldn't care less about what was going to happen to their manager or not, whatever the messages of social networks might have been.
Mm. So maybe in some respects for Pochettino, it's a shot to nothing. This elevates him to the level of super club manager, which is a nice merry-go-round to get on board. And if things go very badly awry, his stock is high enough for him to explain this away as well. Look, it's a basket case. Nobody can sort out that mess over there. And so he probably walks into a pretty big job in 18 months if things go badly awry from the off.
Yes, indeed. And if he walks off at some point, be it in 18 months or earlier, it will be with probably a French League champion title to his honours list, which is empty for the time being, and he might have another treble. There's no reason. PSG are so far ahead of everybody else that, believe me, the situation will right itself. Well, pandemic permitting, of course. And you will see PSG dominating the game in France as it has done for a number of years. In Europe, it's a different thing. They've done, in a way, the most important thing. They've qualified, which is another thing which wasn't held in Tuchel's favor, and which, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of his assistants, called Scholt Löw, who is Hungarian. So apologies if I've completely made a mess of his name, but had talked to one of his country's papers just after the weekend, I believe, and actually starting to spill the beans a little bit and explaining that the decision was absolutely incomprehensible, and insisting on the fact that the problems with Leonardo were the root of it, and that people just didn't realize what Tuchel had actually achieved with that group of players, and that he'd gone as far as he could in that context. So yes, I would say it's a bit of a risk for Pochettino, but it's not a huge risk after all. He will win titles with PSG. If it didn't, there would be real questions asked about, his leadership and management, but he will. And everybody knows the way that PSG is functioning. If he fails in getting the kind of harmony and the kind of and putting together the kind of football that people want to see, it will be put down, like it has been for his predecessors, with the exception perhaps of Unai Emery, to the fact that it is a basket case of a club where the problems do not lie with the technicians and the coaches, and maybe not even with the players as such, but with the whole pyramid and the way that the club is run from the top. So in this case, it's a very well-paid job. It's in the city which he likes, in a club of which he's obviously a very important figure as a player. I would say no strings attached in many ways, so you can totally understand why he decided to say yes to El-Khelaifi when the proposal came.
Yes, I suppose I'm talking of the negative aspects of the job, which are very real, you know, and Pochettino has to go in with his eyes wide open. But you think of the positives. We did, as you say, see a kind of collective focus blossom last year in the latter stages of the Champions League, and they reached a final.
Very
and
much so, yeah.
By all accounts, there was a dinner at Verratti's restaurant, no less, where they said, "Come on, let's get it together and give this a bit of a push." And when they did, they obviously got to a final. So if Pochettino arrives there and can tap into that, wherever that is buried, you know, these are still high-level professionals who do want to win things, I'm sure. Maybe there is, you know, some way he can tap into that drive and say, well, look, one year of you know, hardworking collective here, and I brought Spurs to a Champions League final. I can certainly bring you guys back to one, and maybe one step beyond. You know, he does have talent at his disposal. Like that is the carrot here. That is the big carrot here. Neymar, Mbappe, I think they've already. Is it a year left in their contract, Philippe?
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Okay.
Contract expiring 30th June 2022 in both cases. Situation is a little bit unclear at the moment because obviously the fact that Pochettino has been appointed does change quite a lot of things. But just to rebound on what you were just saying, it is absolutely true that there is absolutely wonderful material to work with, and it's not because we are poking fun or even pointing the finger at Neymar for his extracurricular activities. We have to remember that when he was fit and he was playing, he was absolutely superb with Tuchel, absolutely magnificent, really. And it gets lost a little bit in all the controversies and the image and the reputation he now carries. But he was absolutely superb when he was called on and he was fit, which is, of course, a big problem. Kylian Mbappe is a bit of an enigma because he's gone backwards. He's not as transient, he's not as at ease with himself, I would say, than he was a year or 2 years ago. So maybe if Pochettino can find the key back to the Mbappe that we knew, and we know he can be one of the world's top players, there's no doubt about that, then you think, oh my goodness, yes, it is really well worth having a go. And you know, and you look at the other players around him, I mean, it's not exactly a bad squad. It's a strange squad. It's unbalanced because you've got some players whom you can genuinely call international or even world class, playing alongside players who probably would belong in a mid-table team in Ligue 1. I exaggerate, but not much. So if he can do that, and the other thing as well is that Pochettino is somebody who knows how to use the youth system, and PSG's youth system, whatever the faults of the club, is actually pretty damn good. And he's actually in his squad for tonight's game. He's brought in a couple of 17-year-olds, partly because of injuries and sickness and so forth, but also because he wants to have a look at them. So you're thinking, okay, well, maybe he can do something. And if there is one person who can do something, when you think of the state that Tottenham was in when he arrived, what he did with Tottenham, you think, why wouldn't he be able to do something similar with PSG?
It's very interesting about Mbappe. I hadn't quite realised his form had dipped that way. So what kind of a player are you seeing on the pitch in comparison with the superstar of the last World Cup, for instance?
I think that I see a player who is not as smart in his choices, which is for Mbappe crazy to say because he's one of the smartest players around. He's one of the most intelligent young men you can come across, both as a person and as a player. He's still as quick as he ever was, but there's an element of indiscipline. I mean, have a look, for example, the red cards he got and how he got them, and you will think, well, this doesn't fit in with the Mbappe we know and love. His efficacy and efficiency, I should say, hasn't been the same. The numbers have dropped, and I've dropped in far too many categories. Even if he's had some health problems, some injuries, but also the injuries might have been caused they were not necessarily impact injuries as well. So you feel there is a player here who is still exceptionally good, but is not quite at the extraordinarily high level we saw him towards the end of his Monaco career with the French national team at the beginning of his PSG career. He's not quite there at the moment. And the past season certainly is not one of his best, was not one of his best. So if you can get that Mbappe back, I mean, come on, you've got Angel Di Maria, you've got... you haven't got Edinson Cavani anymore, which is a bit of a problem. You haven't got Thiago Silva anymore, which is another bit of a problem. But you've still got an awful lot of players who are basically game changers. he's got to find a way to make these players like Neymar and Mbappe remember that they play in a team. In fact, that's what I wanted to say for Mbappe. Mbappe last season didn't really play as if he were in a team. He probably felt too often that it was up to him to make the difference, for him to do sometimes a bit of a show, but not always, but just to try a little bit too much. And Pochettino is exactly the right person, I think, to take this kind of player on board and to tell him to actually go back to what he does best.